There will be a briefing.
No briefing. Anyway, welcome to the State Department. I think we have some interns in the back. Welcome. Good to see you in this exercise in transparency and democracy.
Is that what it is?
Sorry,
I
didn't mean to break
thought
out
it was an
laughter.
exercise in spin and obfuscation.
I think we ought to pitch in and let him go someplace else because he's only there for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to run a shadow government that is going to totally upset the new agenda. It just doesn't make sense. And people sit back and they say, my gosh, why can't you guys get this done? I'm saying, we've got a new CEO, we've got some new heads in the different departments, but the same people are there, and they don't believe that the new owners or the new managers should be running the ship.
My last election. For you. Yeah, after my election, I have more flexibility. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand. I transmit this information to Vladimir and Stanford.
This is hard. I mean, we're really talking about intelligence at the highest levels of the U.S. government, setting the broad direction for the nation.
Intelligence at the highest levels of the U.S. government, setting the broad direction for the nation.
There is a lot of talk about the deep state.
Sure.
And, you know, the idea, which a term not a lot of people have heard of before, but this idea that there is this, you know, this entity within the U.S. government, particularly within the intelligence community. Right. And maybe it's because they're angry at the president or they're holdovers from a Democratic administration, whatever it is, that there's this alternate state that is basically trying to have a silent, hidden coup against the president or subvert the president.
So let me address that. So I've heard deep state, all right? I've generally heard it referred to Turkey or Moldova or Russia, not to the American Republic. So I kind of reject it. Let me use the term the permanent government, all right? What? And let me talk about my old agency, CIA, and let's just take a really quick look at recent history. All right, we've had 3 transitions since 2000. In the transition to President George W. Bush, no one changed at CIA. He kept George Tenet on. 8 years later, when President Obama became president, only one person changed at CIA, me. This is not about guilt. In fact, let me be really clear, okay? NSA doesn't just listen to bad people. NSA listens to interesting people. People...
Isn't that funny? He doesn't listen to bad people, he listens to interesting people. Ha ha. Who does he find interesting? Is it the political opponents of his boss? Is it somebody that would rein in the surveillance state? Maybe it's somebody that he'd like to blackmail. Maybe it's someone that would give him some information about insider trading on financial markets. Maybe it's corporate secrets from another country. Maybe he's just some kind of a perverted voyeur. Whatever. He doesn't believe that there's any restraints on him. And what you need to understand is that the lie that we're giving up our freedoms so they can protect us from the bad guys is just that. It's a lie.
In fact, President Obama called my deputy, Steve Kappas, to convince Steve and the rest of the staff to stay on. And then 8 years later, with President Trump, 2 people changed at CIA, Director Pompeo and his deputy. The rest of the workforce, Anderson, are intelligence career professionals. They work for Republicans, they work for Democrats. They vote, they have views, but as professionals, they know what they have to do. This is a community that exists to serve the President of the United States. And he's done things over the past more than 45 days, even as President-elect, that seems to put him at odds with an intelligence community, again, that exists only to serve him.
Have you ever seen an administration so early on, so at odds with the intelligence community?
No. I mean, this is unprecedented. So just take what happened over the weekend. I would imagine that the people, the leadership of NSA, the FBI, the Central Intelligence Agency, have kind of gone to battle stations, if for no other reason than to defend themselves against the implicit charge from the president that they were party to a felony in terms of collecting against a presidential candidate.
Is it dangerous undermining do you believe, the intelligence community?
Look, these are good people. I know these people, all right? They're going to go do their duty, all All right, and they've worked for Republicans, they've worked for Democrats. They want to make American policy as wise as possible by making the president as wise as possible. And so they're going to press ahead. Mike Pompeo is going to work hard to represent them, to keep them focused on their mission. But Anderson, they're human beings.
You take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb to do this.
This great image problem led America's Nazis into initiating Operation Mockingbird, an ongoing policy of using the colossal wealth they were now amassing from drugs and weapons sales to buy up as many TV and film companies, newspapers, and local and national radio stations as they could lay their hands on, to the point where by the 1970s they were proudly boasting that everyone of any significance in the media is CIA.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks?
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Virtually every well-known journalist, newspaper editor, and television presenter became a secret CIA agent, as did many entertainers and film stars. The question now was how best to use trusted public figures like Walter Cronkite. And this was how the first investigative documentaries about the Kennedy assassination came to be made. It will come as a terrific shock to those who have sought truth and solace in these many films, feature articles, and TV specials, to learn that every last one of them, including Oliver Stone's JFK, was actually produced by the CIA. It's a truth you'll never hear on NBC or BBC.
At CBS, we had been contacted by the CIA. As a matter of fact, by the time I became the head of the whole news and public affairs operation in 1954, ships had been established, and I think it was entirely in order for our correspondents at that time to make use of CIA agent chiefs of station and other members of the executive staff of CIA as sources of information which were useful in their assessments of world conditions.
Would you say that continues today?
Well, I would think probably for a reporter it would continue today, but because of all of the revelations of the period of the 1970s, it seems to me that a reporter's got to be much more circumspect in doing it now, or he runs the risk of at least being looked at with considerable disfavor by the public. I think you've got to be much more careful about it.
Another major story that we uncovered was the whole range of CIA media operations throughout the world. We did an analysis of these operations and the use of money, very large-scale money. It's thought between 1/3 and 40% of the CIA's budget. And I should say that that budget figure is the biggest secret that there is in Washington today. At that time, it was estimated that the 1978 budget was in the range of $1.5 billion. A more recent estimate by a military journal, not a liberal journal by any means, estimated that the CIA's budget today is in the range of $10 billion. At any rate, this analysis that we made of the CIA's media operations disclosed, among other things, that they deliver through CIA couriers ready to print or ready to broadcast news, and I put that in inverted commas, which is used by the media. And this is created by the CIA.
How often does the CIA manipulate the media in this way, plant stories, get their views in the media? Is this fairly common as a modus operandi for the CIA?
It goes beyond your, in the course of the past 30 years, it goes beyond your wildest imagination, the extent to which the CIA has gone to manipulate public opinion. If you include the MH Chaos program, which was $1 billion program of setting up proprietary companies, setting up student organizations so they could draw radical students in and do every kind of duplicitous manipulation of national student movements, press, propaganda, labor, extensive formation of labor unions, funding of major labor unions, with the objective essentially of manipulating the mind and attitudes of workers throughout the nation and the world. This was the essential tool that they used to destabilize Chile and overthrow Allende, was of course making the economy scream, getting to the military officers, but it was essentially the truckers' union that finally brought the country down and justified, quote, justified Pinochet's takeover of power. 5,000 university professors they've co-opted. This is Church Committee revelations. I'm not making this up. It's in print, Church Committee's revelations. 5,000 university professors co-opted to help the CIA manipulate people's minds. 400 journalists in the U.S., including big-name journalists. Now, that's a big chunk of the prominent journalists co-opted to function routinely to help the CIA put out its stories and biases to the world.
It's a truth you'll never hear on NBC or BBC. If George Orwell was still alive today, and he was asked to comment upon all the significant political events of the last decade, it's quite likely he would simply restate the Orwellian definition of totalitarianism, to wit, a society living by and for continuous warfare, in which the ruling caste have ceased to have any real function but succeed in claim to power through force and fraud, and then ask whether this sounds like the world we live in.
This is truly deep state, and you have collusion. I mean, this passes for reporting? This is beyond insane. This is war. It's called information operations, information warfare, and clearly the other side, the deep state and the Clinton folks, and I have to say some folks on the Republican side are all lining up. The battle lines are drawn, and it's time for people to understand how to deal with this as if like it's a war.
Yeah. The deep state is committed to maintaining this assault, it seems. I mean, we're not even 4 months into the Trump presidency, and the assaults continue, the attacks continue, and we have, as you indicated at the outset, the New York Times and the Washington Post, these are no longer fake news. I mean, they are, it's an entire psyops. It is a disinformation campaign from previous, former journalists.
One story has monopolized President Trump's time in office like no other, especially on CNN. Russia.
Links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government.
Associates of President Donald Trump communicated with suspected Russian operatives to possibly coordinate the release of information damaging to Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Includes looking at connections of Trump associates.
To believe that an American may be acting as an agent of a foreign power.
It appeared that they were giving the thumbs up to release information when it was ready.
By WikiLeaks between Trump campaign associates and Russian operatives, Anders.
We do know that the FBI was already investigating 4 former Trump campaign associates, Michael Flynn, Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, and Carter Page, for contacts with Russians known to U.S. intelligence. Facing the fact that communication between Trump's associates and these Russians has ceased in recent months, given all the public focus on these Russia ties in the Trump campaign, and then some of these Russian officials have also changed their methods of communications, making monitoring that much more difficult, according to the officials that we talked to.
The Russia aspect of
Whether or not there's provable coordination between the Trump campaign and Russian associates to help him win and defeat Hillary Clinton.
That his campaign associates had with Russia during the election?
Well, I've been saying for a while that there's a cover-up going on here, and the cover-up is among those who worked in the Trump campaign and associates of Trump. And it's now becoming much more clear what it is that they have been concealing, which are these contacts, and which revolve around leaked emails from Podesta's account.
Russia's a ruse.
Began by asking what he thinks Donald Trump represents.
Donald Trump, besides, in my view, not being qualified to be president and actually on the campaign trail and even after the campaign was over, advocating, legitimizing, and enabling people to be quite hateful in America if they were already leaning in that direction. Donald Trump also does not have any understanding of a democracy, and if anything, his leanings are toward tyranny. And by tyranny, I simply mean someone who absorbs the trappings of power, but doesn't understand that he, in a democracy, is a public servant. He is working for us. We are not working for him. And in many ways, Donald Trump seems to be indifferent at best to the democratic process.
Specifically get into this issue of the press. You wrote a fascinating piece saying, as you've said now, democracy depends on an independent press, which is why all tyrants try to squelch it. They use 7 techniques that, worryingly, President-elect Trump already employs. Go in detail into these 7 techniques, beginning with berating the media.
Donald Trump has, almost from the beginning of his campaign, and certainly in the, and he's continued it in the post-election period, to denigrate and berate the media. He holds rallies and he talks about the dishonest media. He uses adjectives like scum and scoundrel to describe the media. He picks out individual members of the press who have criticized him and talks about them in very critical terms or mocks them. This is not the habit of a democratically elected president. We've had presidents who have been upset by particular reports. Harry Truman, for example, was very upset when his when the media reported, a particular reporter criticized his daughter's singing, and he had some quite stern words about that reporter. But we've never before had a president or president-elect who has taken the media on so directly and so negatively and tried to plant in the public's mind, and I think this is the real danger, Amy, trying to plant in the public's mind the notion that the press is the enemy itself. If the public doesn't believe in a free and independent press, then we're in a kind of fact-free universe, because and also a president is immune from criticism, and I think that's consciously or not what Donald Trump is seeking.
Your number 2 point of techniques that Trump has used to control the media: blacklist critical media. During the campaign, he blacklisted news outlets like pulling the Washington Post's credentials. I was surprised at the time that other reporters on the campaign trail covering Trump didn't jointly say, if they are not allowed in, we will not report on you, we will not go in either.
He's announced, for example, that his White House press room, when and if he ever has a news conference, will be no longer be assigned. Media will no longer be assigned seats. They will actually be assigned. Those seats will be assigned by the White House press room, not by the media who cover the White House. This may seem like a small detail.
You're saying by Trump's people. No, it's not a small detail at all, but you're saying by Trump's detail and not the White House Press Association.
Exactly. Instead of the White House Press Association, Trump's own office, his own detail, will be assigning those seats. And there again is a dangerous precedent in terms of undermining the freedom and the independence of the press.
Number 3 in your list of 7 techniques to control the media: turning the public against the media. I want to go to a clip of Donald Trump.
You know my opinion of the media. It's very low. The press are liars. They're terrible people. And the media, look at all those people back there. Scavengers. They're like scavengers. Show them the crowd, press. Show them the crowd. Show them the crowd. Look, they're not turning the cameras. They don't even turn the cameras. They don't even turn the cameras, because you know what? They're very dishonest people. Disgusting reporters, horrible people. Sure. Some are nice. They're scum. Absolute scum. Remember that. Scum.
So you have Trump referring to the media as lying, dishonest, disgusting scum. And then you point out, for example, questioning the press motives, like talking about the Washington Post's publisher, Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon. Talk about that.
Again, this is unprecedented. We have a president-elect of the United States who comes up with ulterior motives for why a major news outlet like the Washington Post might be critical of him. He says Jeff Bezos, who is the publisher of the Washington Post, also from Amazon, is somehow worried about an antitrust action, and therefore doesn't want Trump to be president, or didn't want Trump to be president, is worried about Trump. But this finding of ulterior motives, of assigning particular strange and irrelevant reasons why an outpost of the press might actually be criticizing Donald Trump is an effort, it seems to me, to undermine the credibility of the press, to cause the public to doubt what they are reading. And Donald Trump, remember, lives in a fact-free universe. This is somebody who, even after the election, has said that, for example, he won by a landslide, when we know that he didn't win by a landslide. In fact, Hillary Clinton came out with almost 3 million more votes, popular votes, than Donald Trump.
In fact, since the inauguration, CNN has mentioned Russia on their air nearly 16,000 times. So we sent our undercover reporters inside CNN to understand why, and to determine if CNN even believes that the story is even real.
So you believe like the Russia thing is a little crazy, right? Even if Russia was trying to swing an election, we try to swing their elections. We're in our CIA and doing shit all the time. Like, we're out there trying to manipulate governments. Like, you win because you know the game and you play it right. She didn't play it right. The more CNN constantly like Russia this, Russia that, because it's ratings. Because ratings? Our ratings are incredible right now.
In the month of May, CNN's ratings were significantly higher than they were the year before. The Russia story and Trump have made CNN millions.
Because of, so my boss, I shouldn't say this, my boss a couple days yesterday, we were having a discussion about this dental shoot. He's like, I just want you to know what we're up against here. And he goes, just to give you some context, President Trump pulled out of the climate accords, and for a day and a half he covered the climate accords, and the CEO of CNN said in our internal meeting, he said, good job everybody covering the climate accords, but we're done with it, let's get back to Russia. The CEO? Yeah. Oh my God. So even the climate accords, he was like, okay, a day or so, but we're moving back to Russia. That's what's, I mean, I understand it's all ratings, right? Oh, it's a business. It's a business. People are like, the media has like an ethical, but all the nice cutesy little ethics that used to get talked about in journalism school, you're just like, that's adorable. That's adorable. Yeah, it's a business. Especially cable news, you know. Cable news isn't the New York Times, and it's not even like NBC News. I mean, NBC News still gets 20 million viewers a night. Cable news is getting 1 million, so like they gotta do what they gotta do to make their money, I think. And so I love the news business, but I find it so fascinating. I'm very cynical about it. At the same time, so are most of my colleagues. Yeah, it's like not alone.
In the past, politicians promised to create a better world. They had different ways of achieving this, but their power and authority came from the optimistic visions they offered their people. Those dreams failed, and today people have lost faith in ideologies. Increasingly, politicians are seen simply as managers of public life. But now, they have discovered a new role that restores their power and authority. Instead of delivering dreams, politicians now promise to protect us from nightmares. They say that they will rescue us from dreadful dangers that we cannot see and do not understand.
He could have undermined the messaging so much that he can actually control exactly what people think, and that is our job.
But much of this threat is a fantasy, which has been exaggerated and distorted by politicians. But the Americans were setting out to defeat a mythological enemy. Last week's episode showed the neoconservatives, who are now in power in Reagan's White House, had created an exaggerated and distorted vision of the Soviet Union as the source of all evil in the world. One of their main influences were the theories of the philosopher Leo Strauss. He believed that liberal societies needed simple, powerful myths to inspire and unite the people.
Glenn, explain what the deep state is.
The deep state, although there's no precise or scientific definition, generally refers to the agencies in Washington that are permanent power factions. They stay and exercise power even as presidents who are elected come and go. They typically exercise their power in secret, in the dark, and so they're barely subject to democratic accountability if they're subject to it at all. It's agencies like the CIA, the NSA, and the other intelligence agencies.
The CIA began as the Office of Strategic Services.
You recognize the voice?
Founded by Wild Bill Donovan, whose courage and overall badassery helped win World War II.
Have you figured it out? It's a famous actor. Sling Blade?
He was everything a CIA agent should be. A brave, big-chin, tough guy.
Oh, it's Billy Bob Thornton.
Yeah, a couple of the guys got to meet him. They said it was pretty cool.
And though we've had our failures, we've won our nation's trust, and we kept that bastard Fidel Castro from getting his hands on America. Then someone decided the American taxpayers should foot the bill for more government, and the National Security Agency was born. They secretly monitor all kinds of communication, including the phone calls of American citizens. We fight over how much of the federal budget we should each get.
When I joined the CIA, I knew the deal. If we make a mistake, we cover it up.
That are essentially designed to disseminate disinformation and deceit and propaganda, and have a long history of doing not only that, but also have a long history of the world's worst war crimes, atrocities, and death squads. This is who not just people like Bill Kristol, but lots of Democrats are placing their faith in, are trying to empower, are cheering for, as they exert power separate and apart from, in fact, in opposition to, the political officials to whom they're supposed to be subordinate. And this is not just about Russia.
The Russia thing is just a big nothing burger. Really?
You go all the way back to the campaign, and what you saw was that leading members of the intelligence community, including Mike Morell, who was the acting CIA chief under President Obama,
What I think is going on here is that he believes that this is a political judgment. He believes that the CIA is a political institution, and he's going to have to learn that it's not. It is apolitical. It is there to tell him, call him like you see him. It is the most important institution to him in that regard. It's going to tell him how to think about the world in a way that is divorced of politics
and divorced of policy. And he's going to have to start understanding that.
And Michael Hayden, who ran both the CIA and the NSA under George W. Bush,
Joe, I think even more important, we've been in
continuous crisis now for 45 days, and none of it has been externally stimulated.
This is all an intramural game
within our own government.
No one's tickled us from abroad, so I can only imagine what this is going to look like when we actually
start to get pressure, events start to happen
that do require that sober, methodical response.
Information that he's seen that has led him to believe this is the deputy White House spokesperson. Your gut?
Well, my gut is I think the president forgot for a moment in the morning Saturday that he was actually president. And that he actually could have called the acting director of national intelligence and the director of the FBI and asked them questions if the Breitbart article or the other articles, which frankly didn't say, which they've alleged to have said,
Sir,
he simply could have asked.
Yeah, he could have. I am going to make the leap that he knows he could have asked. So why would he do this?
Well, now you're getting me out of my lane, my background lane. Yeah, but if you're asking me why, he's trying to distract attention from what was a very, very bad news cycle. And let me go very, very dark on you, Mika, all right? The President of the United States put his own reputation, the reputation of his predecessor, and the reputation of his nation at risk to get at least a draw out of the next 24 hours news.
And Mika makes an important point that he could have just... And Mika
makes an
And Mika
makes an
How dare you! And Mika makes an important point that he could have just asked. He asked the National Park Service about the crowd size of his inauguration.
Yeah, Joe, it is really a dark time.
were very outspoken supporters of Hillary Clinton. In fact, Michael Morrell went to the New York Times and Michael Hayden went to the Washington Post during the campaign to praise Hillary Clinton and to say that Donald Trump had become a recruit of Russia. The CIA and the intelligence community were vehemently in support of Clinton and vehemently opposed to Trump from the beginning.
For a spy, finding out you've been compromised, that someone has something on you, is the ultimate nightmare. The worst part for someone who has spent a career training for every situation is knowing that there is nothing that you can do but grit your teeth and try to figure out exactly how bad the nightmare is going to be.
It is a hybrid of corporate America and the national security state. Everyone knows what the military-industrial complex is, since Eisenhower talked about it in his farewell address.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Everyone knows Wall Street and its depredations. Everyone knows how corporate America acts. They're both about the same thing. They're both about money, sucking as much money out of the country as they can, and they're about control. It's how we had deregulation, financialization of the economy, the Wall Street bust, the erosion of our civil liberties, and perpetual war.
You're right, that the secret and unaccountable deep state
floats freely above the gridlock between both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue is the paradox of American government in the 21st century.
Well, that's just the thing. The common narrative of the last 5 years, and on a superficial level it's right, is that government is broken, it's dysfunctional, it's gridlocked. Well, that's true, and that is the visible government, the constitutional government we learn about in Civics 101, and it is gridlocked. But somehow Obama can go into Libya, he can assassinate U.S. citizens, he can collect all our phone records without a by your leave from anyone. He can even bring down a jet carrying a president of a sovereign country without asking anyone's permission, and no one seems to connect the two. The failure of our visible constitutional state and this other government that operates according to no constitutional rules or any constraint by the governed. National security functions of the government, it's the Pentagon, it's Homeland Security, it's the State Department, it's also Treasury because they have a kind of symbiotic relationship with Wall Street.
For one thing, they control the flow of money.
Absolutely. And that's why there's such a flow not only of money but of personnel between Wall Street and the Treasury Department. There's other aspects of government. There's a portion of the judiciary, a small portion of the judiciary, the so-called Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Courts. Most of Congress doesn't even know how they operate. A parallel situation with the national security state, the NSA spent $1.7 billion to build a facility in Utah that will collect 1 yottabyte of information. That's as much information as has ever been written in the history of the world. It costs $400 by the time the Pentagon finishes paying contractors to haul 1 gallon of gasoline into Afghanistan. That's a real extravagant amount of money. In both cases of the national security state and the corporate state, they are sucking money out of the economy. As our infrastructure collapses, we have a tinker toy power grid that goes out every time there's inclement weather. Tens of millions of people are on food stamps. We incarcerate more people than China, an authoritarian state with 4 times our population. Does anyone see the disparity between this extravagance for the deep state and the penury that is being forced on the rest of the country? That isn't a natural evolution. Something made it happen. We're having a situation where the deep state is essentially out of control, it's unconstrained. Since 9/11, we have built the equivalent of 3 Pentagons around the D.C. metropolitan area, holding defense contractors, intelligence contractors, and government civilians involved in the military-industrial complex. There are over 400,000 contractors, private citizens, who have top-secret security clearances.
You say that you came to question this. It took you a while. It was a gradual enlightenment that took place. You were dealing with big numbers and particular details in the budgets that all of these agencies were sending to you when you were on Capitol Hill, right? You were seeing the numbers.
Absolutely.
What was happening to the numbers?
At the end of 2001 is we appropriated a lot of money, and it didn't seem to be going to Afghanistan, the proximate source of the 9/11 attacks. It seemed to be going to the Persian Gulf region, and I said, what's going on here? Saddam Hussein didn't bring down the Twin Towers. So the little light went on, and I began to sort of disenchant myself from the normal groupthink that tends to take over in any organization.
But talk about some of some of the others who are in the game.
Wall Street is perhaps the ultimate backstop to the whole operation because they generate so much money that they can provide second careers for a lot of the government operatives. They're going to make more money than they ever dreamed they would on Wall Street. And I think a good example of that is the most celebrated soldier of the last decade, David Petraeus. What did he do when he retired? He went to Kohlberg Kravis Roberts, a Wall Street buyout firm with $90 billion in assets under management.
You describe him as a kind of avatar of the deep state.
He is, in a way, because he now represents both ends of it. We see now our present-day Cincinnatus did not pick up the plow when he laid down the sword.
Cincinnatus was the Roman who left his farm to become a general in the war. When the war was over, he went back to be a farmer. That doesn't happen today.
No, it doesn't. The vast majority of generals seem to end up on the boards of defense contractors.
Talk a little bit about what you call this strange relationship between Silicon Valley and the government and how it fits into the deep state.
Well, the National Security Agency could not do what it does. The CIA could not do what it does without Silicon Valley. Now, Silicon Valley, unlike the defense contractors, mostly sells to private individuals and to companies. It's not a big government vendor. However, its services are necessary, and de facto, they have become a part of the NSA's operations. I'm sure the CEOs of some of these companies try to obscure the fact that this has mostly been voluntary for many years.
You mean the surveillance?
The surveillance.
Thanks to the journalist Lee Fang, we have another revelation into how the deep state enterprise works. Writing for the Republic Report, a nonpartisan, nonprofit that investigates money in politics, he takes up that controversial trade deal called the Trans-Pacific Partnership that President Obama is trying to push through Congress with minimum debate and no amendments. Controversial because some of its provisions reportedly enable corporate power to trump representative government, even go around domestic courts and local laws. One is said to prevent governments from enacting safeguards against another bank crisis. Another, to empower corporations to sue governments for compensation if, say, environmental protections or regulations on tobacco and drugs interfered with future profits. Because of the secrecy, we don't know everything that's in the draft agreement. Senator Elizabeth Warren calls it a chance for these banks to get something done quietly out of sight that they could not accomplish in a public place with the cameras rolling and the lights on. Which brings us to two officials chosen by President Obama to lead those trade negotiations. Lee Fang reports that they received multi-million-dollar bonuses as they left giant financial firms to join the government. Bank of America gave this man, Stephen Seelig, more than $9 million in bonus pay as he was nominated to become the Undersecretary of Commerce for International Trade. And this man, Michael Froman, got over $4 million when he left Citigroup to become the current U.S. Trade Representative. Now, both are no doubt honorable men. They are all honorable men. But when push comes to shove and the financial interests of huge corporations are on the table, we can only hope they will act as independent men, not faithful servants of the deep state. But given the secrecy, we may never know. According to Lee Fang, many large corporations with a strong incentive to influence public policy give executives bonuses and other incentive pay if they take jobs within the government. Among them, Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, J.P. Morgan Chase, the Blackstone Group, Fannie Mae, Northern Trust. Citigroup even provides an executive contract that awards additional retirement pay upon leaving to take a full-time, high-level position with the U.S. government or regulatory body. I'm not making this up. You get a bigger incentive if you leave Wall Street to go regulate Wall Street. So it is the fox is groomed for the chicken coop, and the deep state grows fat on its prey.
In 1985, a new force began to arrive in Afghanistan who were going to challenge Azzam's approach. They were the extreme radical Islamists who were being expelled from prisons across the Arab world.
And then, very quietly, most of the governments in the Middle East, the Arab governments, began to empty their prisons of their bad guys and send them off to the jihad with a very fondest hope that they become martyred. Many of them were the people in Egypt that had not been executed after the murder of Sadat, but were implicated in it and been imprisoned. Off they go.
One of the most powerful of these newcomers was Ayman Zawahiri. He was the leader of a radical faction from Egypt called Islamic Jihad, and he was convinced that they, not the moderates, were the true Islamists.
We are here. We are here. The real Islamic Front. We are here. The real Islamic Front and the real Islamic opposition against Zionism. We are here. The real Islamic Front against Zionism, communism, and imperialism.
But it also involved a militant rejection of all American influence over the jihad, because America was the source of this corruption.
If you leave, the problem of support to the Mujahideen solves itself.
Gorbachev was shocked by the intransigence of the US administration. He sent a private message through the KGB warning the Americans that if they allowed the Mujahideen to take control in Afghanistan, it would not produce democracy. Instead, he predicted, the most extreme forms of Islamism would rise up and triumph. But Gorbachev's warning was ignored. As Soviet troops left Afghanistan, both the Americans and the Islamists came to believe that they had not only won the battle for Afghanistan, they had also begun the downfall of the entire evil empire. But in reality, their victory was an illusion. They had conquered a phantom enemy, an exaggerated and distorted fantasy they had created in their own minds. The real reason the Soviet Union collapsed was because it was a decrepit system, decaying from within.
I think probably one of the greatest myths in American political discourse right now, is that actions of the American government were responsible for the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed like a house of cards because it was a house of cards. It rotted away from within. The economy was rotten. The political process was rotten. They had developed a central government that was no longer believed by people outside of Moscow. There was total cynicism throughout the Soviet system of governance. There was no real civil society. But the Reagan administration and the minions of the Reagan administration will tell you that Afghanistan led to a collapse of the Soviet Union itself. The collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the collapse of the East European Empire. We were saying that this was entirely fanciful, and the United States missed all of this because they believed their own myths and their own fanciful notions. They had become their own victims of their own lies.
And for the Islamists too, a great myth was born out of the struggle in Afghanistan, that it was they who had conquered the Soviet Union. The Islamists believed that this great victory would start a revolution that would sweep across the Arab world and topple the corrupt leaders. But as with the neoconservatives, this dream was built on an illusion.
The Islamists were convinced that they were the key instruments in the demise of the Soviet army in Afghanistan. They just would not like to remember that without US military help and training, they couldn't have done anything, and also that the Afghans were the ones who ousted the Soviets, not the Arab jihadis, who didn't really fight. They were trained, but they were not the fighters. But the myth has it that they were the ones who won. I mean, this was jihad that had triumphed. This was something very powerful that was a mobilizing force for Islamists worldwide.
But there was a deep rift within the Islamist fighters based in Peshawar, between the moderates, led by Abdullah Azzam, who believed this revolution could be accomplished politically, and the extremists, like Ayman Zawahiri, who saw violent revolution as the only way. and Zawahiri now set out to extend his influence over the movement and to undermine Abdullah Azzam. To do this, he seduced Osama bin Laden and his money away from Azzam. He promised bin Laden that he could become the emir, the leader of Zawahiri's small extremist group, Islamic Jihad.
Ayman al-Zawahiri and another group of Egyptians, they refused to pray behind Abdullah Azzam in Peshawar. They use to create rumors in Peshawar against Abdullah Azzam. That's why we became angry about Osama, why he closed these people to him. They accepted him as an emir, and he accepted them as a group. Finally, I don't know who did use the other.
What do you think?
I think the other used him.
Because he had the money?
Yes.
Then, at the end of 1989, Abdullah Azzam was assassinated by a huge car bomb in Peshawar. It is still unknown who carried out the assassination. But despite his death, it seemed as if Azzam's vision of a political revolution might prevail. In the early 90s, in countries across the Arab world, Islamist parties began to gather mass support. In Algeria, the Islamic Salvation Front won overwhelming victories in local elections and looks certain to win the coming general election. But the governments in both Egypt and Algeria faced a terrible dilemma. At the heart of the Islamist vision was the idea that the Quran should be used as the political framework for the society, an absolute set of laws beyond debate that all politicians had to follow. The implication of this was that political parties would be irrelevant because there could be no disagreement. The people were about to vote in parties that might use their power to end democracy.
C'est un dilemme. Comment trouver une autre solution pour arrêter le processus électoral et dire il n'y aura pas de deuxième tour? Fallait-il laisser arriver au pouvoir un parti qui vous disait oui, un homme, une voix, mais une seule fois? On n'ira pas aux élections après parce que la démocratie est coffre, elle est impie. Lorsque nous serons au pouvoir, nous y resterons pour l'éternité parce que c'est nous qui sommes les détenteurs de la vérité religieuse et c'est nous qui appliquerons le Coran.
Faced by this dilemma, in Algeria, the army decided to step in. And in June 1991, they staged a coup d'etat and immediately cancelled the elections. Mass protests by the Islamists were repressed violently and their leaders arrested. At the same time in Egypt, the government also clamped down. They arrested hundreds of Muslim Brotherhood members and banned the organization from any political activity.
What happened is a wave of arresting Muslim brothers, a wave of military court for Muslim brothers, going to kill some of Muslim brothers under torture. They stopped all the free elections in all of the society institution. And this wave and this manner, you open the doors of hell for the violent groups who were hidden underground, and it stops the moderates, opens the door for the violence.
For Ayman Zawahiri, this was a dramatic confirmation of his belief that the Western system of democracy was a corrupt sham. Groups of radical Islamists who had developed his theories in even more extreme forms now set out to create violent revolutions in Algeria and Egypt. It would be the start of a jihad that would liberate the Muslim world from corruption.
وهذه المذلة وهذا الكفر الذي قد طغى وعم على أرض الإسلام لا سبيل لدكه إلا بالجهاد وإلا بالرصاص وإلا بالعمليات الاستشهادية.
Bin Laden and the others started from now on to wage their own jihad, i.e. Not to compromise, not to try to compromise with more moderate groups, but thinking that an armed vanguard would be able to implement the seizing of power. They were convinced that they could duplicate the Afghan victory, or quote-unquote victory, that they could establish an Islamist state in Algeria, in Egypt, and the like. They thought that was capture the hearts and minds of the Muslim masses, that people would realize that strength and victory were on the side of the jihadis.